You ready, AJ? Thumbs up. It's always good to see you folks. I look forward to these moments. I genuinely do. I'm not just saying that as a means of introduction. I spend a lot of time over the week looking forward to and anticipating the opportunity to break open the Word with you. I liken it to preparing a meal, and I hope you like the taste this morning. And if there are times where there are vegetables that you have to eat and you don't really want to eat them, well, again, just consider the source. Again, ultimately, it's the Lord's material. Feel free to be a Berean on your own time, triple check everything that I say, be in the Word for yourself. If there are areas where you think there's heresy, please let me know, and I will endeavor, as always, to get it right. But I think that this is going to be pretty simple in summary. This morning I want to introduce a new multi-part summer sermon series, a lot of S's there, and it's entitled One Another. There's actually a slide, it's already up, thank you, AJ. The meaning of this is going to become clear in just a few moments. And since today's sermon is really just going to be a bit of a foundational message, I'm going to labor today to build a foundation that's going to sustain and support the rest of the series. I'll probably go a little bit shorter than normal. I'm guessing 25 versus kind of the customary 35 or 40 minutes. That could be a preacher's lie, because if I get inspired somewhere mid-sermon to go longer, I will. But I'm kind of forecasting a shorter message, a slightly shorter message. So please give me the best of your attention. I want to begin in Matthew 22. So please turn, flip, or scan to that chapter of the Bible. Swipe to that section. Matthew chapter 22. We're going to begin this series with really a pretty famous text. It will not be new revelation in one sense, but as I tend to say oftentimes we Christians mess up in the fundamentals, not calculus level Christianity. There is a place in the body of Christ for calculus level Christianity. Really advanced, deep stuff. I like going there from time to time, especially in the smaller group settings. But usually it's the fundamentals that we mess up on. And today I'm going to begin in kind of a fundamental place, and I want to use it as a springboard for this broader topic that I want to spend about a month in. Matthew 22, in context, Jesus is about to provide really a timeless answer to an important question, even if the question in context was asked for the wrong reasons. There were always people asking Jesus questions, but oftentimes they weren't really asked to get information. They were meant to trip him up somehow, or to somehow expose him as faulty or heretical, so that they would have means to kill him. But Jesus was very good at dealing with that. And he's about to entertain a question, and I want to just summarize it for you, and then I want to look at his answer. One day he was asked the question, and again, it's a good question: what is the greatest commandment found in what we would call the Old Testament law of Moses? In other words, this guy is asking Jesus, if you were to summarize in the simplest possible terms, what is our fundamental obligation as a believer? What would it be? In Jesus, you guys are already, I love it, you guys are already there. Jesus takes the time to answer that, even though it was asked with a poor motive in heart and in mind. Jesus says the following, Matthew 22, I want to pick it up at verse 37. Matthew 22:37, I'm reading from the NIV. Jesus, in response, says the following, and again, this should sound somewhat familiar. If this is a new text for you, what a privilege it is to bring you to this chapter this morning. What's our duty before the Lord? It's this: love the Lord your God just a little bit. Love the Lord your God, for the most part, when you have the time and it's convenient. No. Help the pastor out. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. In other words, it's a completeness of being. Our primary obligation to the Lord is to love him completely. Now, has anyone born of man and woman ever fully achieved that? No. But that is what we are to strive after. He says in verse 38 that this is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. And finally in verse 40 he says, all of the law and the prophets. if I were to paraphrase the entire Old Testament, hang on these two commandments, which, by the way, are referenced back to the book of Deuteronomy 6 and Leviticus 19. And herein we see really a singular command that has two aspects to it. We are to love the Lord fully, that is our primary and chief duty, verse 37 and 38. And we are to love others really in a selfless and sacrificial manner, and that's verse 39. And I love that the second commandment, or the second aspect of this one broader commandment, really is similar in nature to the first, but I want to make this note. It differs in directionality. The first commandment, or the first aspect of this commandment, focuses on our vertical relationship, man and God. We're not equals, by the way. God is our superior. So I use the word a vertical relationship. We are to love him completely. Creation to creator, servant to Lord. But the second aspect really deals with our horizontal connections, how we love one another. And if we strive to love the Lord and love others as we ought to, everything else will naturally fall into place. So really, to borrow some information from Robert's Men's Breakfast yesterday, if you really want to know what the will of the Lord is for your life, this is a great place to start. And if you are going to be the kind of person who will strive to love the Lord in the manner in which you ought to, and love others in the manner in which you are commanded to, then likely most, if not everything, is going to fall into place. Hence verse 40, that really everything, the Old Testament prophets and the law, they hang or they hinge. They find their ultimate foundation in these two things. Now, I want to go a little bit deeper. That's kind of, just dipping our toe in the water. But I want to put forth the idea this morning, and it's really foundational to this series, that there's a deep connection between these two aspects of this one command. In other words, our vertical relationship is deeply tied to our horizontal relationship. So much so, our vertical relationship to God is made manifest in how we treat one another. If you want to write this down, you can. The reality or the absence of our love for God is made evident in how we treat each other. In other words, if you have a person that treats people poorly, there's a very good chance they have very little love for the Lord. Because those two things, they connect. One spills over and flows into the other. If as a believer you seek to love people, likely it's because that is influenced by the love that you have for the Lord. And this is a relationship that is touched upon many, many times in the New Testament text. And I figure if we're going to talk about basic Christianity, we should talk about Jesus being the founder, in a sense, of our faith. Let's go to the Gospel of John. I want to look at just a little bit of the Gospel of John, chapter 14. John chapter 14, and I want to begin to show you this connection between loving God and loving others, that your love for God will be demonstrated in the love that you have for others. John 14, in context, it's the night of his betrayal. You could say it's around the timing of the Last Supper. That would be accurate. So in these final moments, Jesus is really trying to communicate with his followers some vital information. I've said this before, but I think it's worth reaffirming that as a pastor, I've had really a sacred privilege, but it's a difficult one at times, to be in the presence of a lot of death. I'm typically in the room or with people as someone passes away. And I have never, ever seen someone who is dying or about to die convey something trivial or frivolous to those who are left behind. I have never seen a dying person say, you know what, son, I love you, but please make sure that you let the cat and the dog out at night. Or please make sure you pay my cable bill, I'm running a little bit late. They never go that way. They're always trying to communicate that which they really want to convey. That's just the nature of things. Jesus knows he literally has just hours left. And he's trying to convey some things. He's trying to, simple in summary, if you will, the entirety of his 3 years and distill it down into just a few points. John chapter 14, I want to look at verse 15, and really just the first part of this. and a little bit of crowd help here is welcome. Let's fill in the blank. And I might look for a couple of different translations. John 14, starting at verse 15. Do you see where it says, if you love me? Okay, let's try this. If you love me, keep my commands. Keep my commandments. Anybody have an ESV out there, English Standard Version? Probably the best English version that we have. We just don't really use it a ton. Tracy, I saw your hand first. Jesus speaking to his followers directly and indirectly now to us, thousands of years later. If you love me, Miss Tracy, what do you have? You will keep my commandments. In other words, the love that you have for the Lord will manifest in an obedience to his commands. Now, if you do a little bit of searching around the immediate context, you see something very interesting in the following chapter. Let's go to chapter 15, starting at verse 12. My command is this. John 15:12. And he just said, if you love me, you'll keep my commands. And now he says, my command, the most preeminent command that I can give you is this. Help the pastor out. Love each other as I have loved you. And if you skip down to verse 17, you see it repeated. This is my command. In other words, gang, if I can tell you one thing to major on, if you're going to be my follower, if you're going to obey my commands, and if you love me, you'll keep my commands, this is what you are to do. Verses 12 and 17. Love each other. What a simple statement, by the way. But how revolutionary. And what's the manner in which we are to love each other? To the degree and in the manner in which he loved us. How does Jesus love you? Yeah, selfless, sacrificial, unconditional. It's something that transcends what we're used to because most of our love, if we're completely honest, is entirely conditional. I'll love you if you love me first. You want to know why most marriages fail? All eyes this way. If you're married, pay very close attention. I'll save you a lot of work, headache, lawyers, and beyond. Most marriages fail because it becomes conditional. I'll love you if you love me. That is not how marriage works. I will love you, period. And if both parties are committed to that, it will endure. That might seem like a gross oversimplification, but it's just true. Because there's something about love that draws love out of us. When somebody serves you, you want to serve them. But if every relationship is due for me and I might do for you, it's going to go nowhere. But Jesus comes along and says this deeply profound thing. This is my command. Love each other. 3 words. And again, the degree to which we obey his commands is reflective of the degree we love him. I love God, but I hate people. Wrong. Wrong. Your love for God is evident in the love that you have for people. So if you're living in such a way that it's all about you and people are irrelevant, that equates to me that God is also irrelevant in the way in which you carry yourself. And it's not me who's saying it, it's just right there. Let's go to the book of 1 John. Same author, just a few years after. 1 John. We're going to look at a few verses from chapters 2, 3, and 4. So let's go to 1 John chapter 2. Again, I'm laying a foundation. I want to drill some points. Even though they're basic, I want to make them plain. Now again, this connection between loving God and loving others is also made clear in the book of 1 John. I'm going to read probably about 10 verses in total over the course of 3 chapters, so do your best to kind of just follow along. If you get lost in where I am, just listen at that point. 1 John chapter 2, I want to pick it up in verse 9. And John, again, is speaking to believers. He's not speaking to the lost. Anyone who claims, verse 9, to be in the light. In John's verbiage, that's if you're claiming to have a connection with the Lord founded upon love. If anyone who claims to be in that relationship, being in the light, but hates a brother or a sister, what's the reality according to John? They're still in darkness. Anyone who loves their brother and sister lives in the light, and there's nothing in them to make them stumble. Verse 11, but anyone who hates a brother or sister is in the darkness and walks around in the darkness. They don't know where they're going because the darkness has blinded them. You know, I love dealing with people, Christian and non-Christian, because the longer I live, the more I see a benefit in serving the Lord. It's amazing how many people in this world just live in darkness. They have no idea what the point of life is. It's all about them. And they kind of just grope around, and they never really seem to have all of the elements of their life come into any focus. They just grope around in kind of this lost condition. Because the more we make it about us, the farther we are removed from what the Lord has for us. But if we love each other as we ought to, that's an indicator, again, that our vertical relationship is correct. Let's skip to chapter 4 for the sake of time. This is the one that I really wanted to focus on. 1 John chapter 4, starting at verse 20, John just goes for the jugular here, and he just puts it down. Again, if you have any problem with the text or with this message, just wrestle with the Lord, because ultimately this is just what he says. Whoever claims to love God but hates a brother or a sister is a what? Tough language. Who likes being called a liar? Nobody. So if you have a claim to love the Lord but you hate somebody, well, congratulations. You're a liar. For whoever doesn't love their brother or sister whom they have seen can't love God whom they've not seen. And he has given us this command. And again, I bet that John is recalling the text from John 14 and 15 in his mind as he writes this. Anyone who loves God must also love their brother and sister. So again, I'm taking a long time to drill a point home. The love you have for God is made manifest or evidenced by the love that you have for one another. And an absence of a love for God is manifest in an absence of any horizontal considerations. Kind of beginning to move to a close. And I want to make another point that's related to this. And by extension, the reality of our faith is also evident by a love for others. How many realize that things like faith and love are pretty important biblical topics? So we're talking about some pretty heavy hitters here. And I just made the claim, and we saw it in the Word, that our love for God is evidenced by how we treat other people. But the same can be said about our faith. That if our faith is genuine in the Lord, that also will spill over into our horizontal connections. Let's go to the book of James chapter 2. I didn't write this one. Someone far more wise and inspired than I will ever be penned this. James chapter 2. A lot of Bible this morning, that's okay. James chapter 2, I want to start at verse 14. And what we see is that James is dealing with this theme that we've been talking about for the last 15 or so minutes. And he kind of begins with a set of rhetorical questions. James chapter 2, starting at verse 14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Let me give you the Pastor James paraphrase. What good is it if someone talks about their trust in God, but there's nothing in their life that serves as an evidence of that trust? And he asks the question, can such a faith save them? Now we know the answer because he's already, again, the way that he's setting it up, we already have the answer. So suppose, for example, a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, what does he say? It's dead. It's dead. Verse 18, someone will say, you have faith and I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith in my deeds. Verse 9 is a frightening text. You believe that there is one God. Essentially, good for you. Even the demons believe that, though, and shudder. In other words, an intellectual assent isn't enough. When we talk about, I believe in God, well, it's not just that he's out there somewhere and he exists, but it's more than that. Even the demons will have to admit that there is a God, but it benefits them not. Verse 20, you foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless or dead? And now he's going to go back to the book of Genesis, and you can study this in your own time. Wonderful, wonderful texts. And he harkens back to the days of the patriarch Abraham. If you don't know a whole lot about Abraham, he really is a character worthy of some significant study. Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete. In other words, it was made manifest. It was illustrated by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, this is Genesis 15, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteous. And he was called God's friend. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do, and not just by a claim alone in a sense. Now, I want to make this point very clear. We are not saved by works. You can be the greatest human being to ever live. It will not benefit you. We are saved purely by grace through faith, correct? Everyone says amen. I am saved by grace through faith. It is the gift of God, not of works. But if the faith is real, it's going to manifest. It's going to show up. If the faith is genuine, it's going to bring forth a degree of transformation. Not only in the things that we abstain from, the sin that we resist, but in the way that we proactively serve others and love others. Ephesians chapter 2, don't turn there, but verses 8 through 10 are a great reference to consider in your own time. The reality of our faith in God and our love for him, in other words, the status of our vertical relationship, I'm being repetitive by the way, the status of our vertical relationship is evidenced by our horizontal connections. So much so, and I want to shift gears a little bit, so much so that our care for others will be a central theme at the judgment. All eyes this way. How many of us realize that one day we will individually stand before the Lord? It's going to happen. My advice is be prepared for that meeting. Don't let it catch you by surprise. What a tragedy it would be, by the way. Let me just talk to churchgoers for a second. If you're listening online, you're not really familiar with Christianity, just thank you for tuning in. But I want to speak to those who maybe have been going to church for decades. What a tragedy it would be to be so close to salvation and hear about this Jesus, but be wholly unprepared to meet him when the time actually comes. Wow, what a colossal waste and tragedy. But if we can be prepared for that and recognize that we will one day give account, we can seek to daily live in proper orientation to what's coming. Let's go to the Gospel of Matthew chapter 25. This is the final text of the morning, and we're going to look at a decent block. And again, as we read, I want you to notice the emphasis that is placed on action. Matthew 25, final text of the morning. I'll be done by about quarter of, so give me your best 10 minutes. Matthew 25, starting at verse 31. I'll give just one more second to turn there. Jesus says the following. And I want you to use your imagination. I want you to envision this. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, by the way, it's not if. It's when. Do you realize that the Lord already has the appointed time for all this, by the way? God the Father already has it mapped out, how it's going to work. Matthew 25, verse 31. When the Son of Man, that's speaking of himself, by the way. He loved to use the term Son of Man in relation to himself. Basically, when I come in my glory, and all the angels with me, he's talking more in the third person, though. He will sit on his glorious throne. Can you see? Can you get a mental image? All the nations will be gathered before him. And he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. Can you just imagine the logistics involved in this, by the way? How many people do you think are going to be standing in front of him at this moment? I'll give you the scientific answer, lots. He's going to begin to separate them into groups. His divine sovereignty, omniscience, and power, he's going to begin to separate. Be very attentive where you're placed that day, because he already tells you what side you want to be on in this moment. The king will say to those on his right, hi, everybody on my right. Come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For you had a proper theological stance, and you memorized the 16 fundamental truths of the assemblies of God. And you sang the songs, and you gave a bunch of money. No. Those things are good, by the way. Nothing wrong with the 16 fundamental truths. But look at what he says. For I was hungry. And you did something as simple as give me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. How many realize that those are kind of just basic things? You may never be a billionaire. Can I be honest with you? You probably won't be. You will probably never be a celebrity. You may not be a candidate for a Mensa, that IQ genius league. But by the raising of a hand, how many can make a meal for somebody hungry? How many people can give a cup of cold water or coffee? How many can ask somebody into their home and provide some clothes and care for somebody who's sick, and even something as radical as talk to somebody who's in prison? Those are things anybody can do, young and old alike, rich and poor, black and white, doesn't matter. Anybody can access this. But I love verse 37 because the righteous are going to pose the question, Jesus, when did we see you hungry and feed you? Or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did you see a stranger, or we see a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? And the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. I love this text, and I'll tell you why. This text indicates to me that every activity, the simplest of acts, is charged with a sense of eternal meaning. Everything I do. Someone's thirsty. Do you want some water? It can be complete strangers, by the way. Some of you are so talented mechanically. You see somebody broken on the side of the road. I love Sean Barry. A few weeks ago, he went and helped a guy jump his car. He didn't call me because I would have been useless. But we all have something. You know, the Bible has an interesting line, we have entertained angels unaware. How cool would it be if one day you're at the judgment and that was actually an angel in that situation and God just wanted to see what you would do? Wow. Everything we do is charged with a sense of eternal gravity. And because of that, one day will be a reward, or there will be a corresponding reward. Now, unfortunately, the plot's about to thicken. Verse 41, he's about to change gears to those on his left. And I will not look at you people while I preach this, because I know better things of you. Depart from me, verse 41, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, you didn't give me anything to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, you didn't invite me in. I needed clothes, and you didn't clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't look after me. And they will also answer, kind of in this confusion, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and didn't help you? We've never seen you in that condition, Lord. What are you talking about? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you didn't do for one of the least of these, you didn't do it for me. You know what that verse indicates to me, along with the preceding section? It's not just about loving and serving the lovable and the easy to deal with. Be honest for a second. How many of you have people in your world that are difficult? Be honest. It's all of us. It's that coworker. It's that crazy employee you have to put up with every day. Or depending on your position, your employer. Could be that neighbor. You just want to build that wall because they drive you insane. Can I give you some friendly advice? Go out of your way to love them. Be ridiculous in your compassion and just love for that person. You know, we want to reach the world, but we don't want to do a whole lot to reach the world. But this kind of stuff. Now look at the eventual final summation here in verse 46. There's eternal punishment in store for those on the wrong side. Conversely, the righteous will go toward eternal life. Now, I want to move to a close with this, and that's not a lie, that's true. This text or this passage seems to contradict a central biblical theme that we are saved by faith and faith alone. If that's the case, why will the king put so much emphasis on works? And here's the final answer that will tie everything together. The best barometer for the reality of your faith and your love for God is what you do for others. Our works, the manner in which we treat people, is the best evidence of a genuine love and faith. And Jesus himself will look to our works on the day of judgment as the best barometer that we are truly his or not. Jesus put it this way, a tree is known by its fruit. In conclusion, there is this connection between our love for God and others. The best indicator of a healthy love and a vital faith is how we treat others. Therefore, we cannot downplay the obligation that we have, what does it say? To one another. Because the Bible never does. In fact, that phrase on the screen, one another, is significant. And it appears often in the New Testament writings, each time kind of addressing or looking at a different facet of our responsibility to our fellow man. And for the next number of weeks, I want to consider some of the one another's that appear in the Bible. And each time we're going to have to come face to face with our obligation, not just to the Lord, but to one another. And because I love you, and because I want to invest in your relationship with the Lord, I want you to look at your bulletin for a moment. Take it out. Because inside, lovingly and carefully placed, there is an insert. Everybody see it? That is every time the phrase one another appears in the New Testament. For homework, should you desire to do any homework, start reading. Break open your Bible. Look at the verse. Push yourself and look at some of the context. Because again, I'm just giving you the isolated verse. You might have to go back a couple of verses to kind of read the whole thing. And what you're going to notice as you read is that there are very common themes in how we are to love one another. There's going to be a lot of repetition. Repetition's a very good teacher. But there's some 50 to 60 different references there, different times where that phrase is employed by biblical authors. And it could be Jesus himself, certainly the Apostle Paul, and beyond. My advice is take the time to study it. Because we're going to kind of let this message, we're going to let it speak to our hearts for about a month. So over the course of the month, in your own time, should you have your own personal time, and I pray that you genuinely do, read through them. Let the Lord speak to you. Go to the next level and share with a friend, fellow church member and beyond, how the Lord's been speaking to you. Hey, Bobby, I read this morning and I found it just so amazing. Have you read anything? At that point, don't lie. If you haven't, start reading. But get in the Word, because there's so much more in the Bible than I will ever have time to address from the Sunday morning pulpit. You can leave the insert, you can throw it on the ground if you want, you can just put it in a Bible and never open it. But if you took the month or so and kind of chewed through a few at a time, I think we'll all be the better for it. Let's close in prayer. Father, once again, we say thank you. Because we recognize that you have given us so much. Lord, you have loved us to a degree that doesn't even make sense. But we love you because you first loved us. Lord, I pray that in this body you would stimulate a sense of love for you. But God, let it spill over. Let it manifest, God, in the manner in which we treat one another. And in the weeks and month ahead, as we spend time just considering this one simple two-word phrase, speak to us, God. Bring forth change in our hearts and help us to be a better people, a more Christ-like people because of it. As we go our separate ways, I do pray your blessing and your ongoing favor, God. We thank you for this time. Dismiss us with your blessing. In Jesus' name. Everyone says,